Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome in to the first game of the Week 13 NFL slate. We have a pretty fun Thursday night game on tap with the Seattle Seahawks visiting the Dallas Cowboys with a game of like a 46.5, 47 over under, something like that. I am Gary Hartman here to break down this one game DFS slate, as always, joined by the one, the only, the great Cody Main. Cody, how are you doing?
I'm doing good to kick off this week 13. A fairly fun matchup, I think, even though we've got a 9-point spread here, 46.5 point total. Hopefully we can come close to approaching what Vegas has set the total at. It's been a year of unders in prime times, which has not been fun for you and I, or for anyone else that is gambling on these games. But, hopefully there's some optimism for points here, even though we've got pretty good defenses on tap. And a game that has seeding implications, of course, for the Cowboys in the NFC, also has huge playoff implications for the Seahawks. If the season ended today, they would be the 6th seed. But boy, they've got a murderer's row of games coming up here. They've got the Cowboys tonight. They've got to play San Francisco and Philadelphia as well. They've got 3 winnable games to close out their season. But you think as a Seahawks fan or player or coach, you would really like to try and steal one of these games against the cream of the crop of the NFC. So hopefully they keep it close tonight. We can see some fun football on the field.
Yeah, and two teams that have been passing quite a bit. And so that's always exciting for fantasy purposes. Cody, when you were writing your article, and obviously encourage checking out Cody's Showdown breakdown every week, but I think there's a ton of good nuggets this week, particularly a lot of skill position guys that we're interested in on most main slates. So obviously guys that will be interested on a Showdown slate. But what else did you take away from a construction standpoint or anything else when you were studying this game?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing from a construction standpoint is we have a 9-point spread. I wanted to just kind of get an idea of what the field's been doing this season. We know what they've been doing in seasons past in terms of just macro roster construction when we've got these big spreads. And granted, some of the teams that we've discussed in the past, most of them being the Giants, the Broncos, some others thrown in there, the Jets as well on these primetime slates, don't have nearly as fun of offenses as the Seahawks do with DK and Charbonnet and some of these guys that are at least appealing fantasy options. But regardless, looking at games with a 7-point spread or greater this season, the field's really been leaning into this 5-1 construction. We see that kind of playing out in the games with a 7-point spread or greater. 5-1 roster construction has been used at a 29.8% clip. 4-2 roster construction used at a 36% clip. You see on the other side of the spectrum, 2-4 used at just an 8.6% clip. 1-5 just a 1.4% clip. So I ran everything. Obviously, this includes slate-specific context, the table that you're seeing on Gary's screen here. This includes all the slate-specific pricing and everything that goes into that. So it's not just a one-for-one kind of example here. But I do think that 2-4 roster construction, certainly 1-5 roster construction, going to be very, very, very under-owned tonight. And so if you get the sense that Seattle does keep this thing close, maybe they win outright, maybe they at least cover the 9-point spread, you're going to get paid off with pretty low ownership there. So that was the first thing that kind of stood out to me. And then the second thing, I really think this 5-1 projection might end up getting steamed up quite a bit. We've got some cheap options on the Dallas side with their secondary tight ends, some secondary pass catchers. Of course, we always have the defense in play for Dallas. So I do think that 5-1 side might end up getting steamed up a little bit. You could see that a little closer to, 20% than the 16.4% we have there. So those are the main things to keep in mind from a roster construction standpoint. The other thing that stood out, we've talked about some slates recently where pricing doesn't necessarily matter as much. Pricing's pretty darn tight tonight, and you can build teams that you feel really comfortable about, but you're not going to be able to kind of just go full jam in the studs because there isn't as many, stone min options that project well that are going to allow you to do that. So I do think from, a salary perspective, if you're thinking about ways to limit your dupes going forward, a soft cap at like 49.5 is going to be a good way to start limiting your expected dupe rate. Really tough to get those lineups that come in under that salary cap.
Fascinating, because usually we're willing to eat more salary for sure. That's kind of the parameters that I put on a main slate. So definitely keep that in mind tonight. Let's dive right in at quarterback. And Cody, I actually want to start on the Geno Smith conversation. So he's like the 5th or 6th most expensive player on the slate. This has not been the Geno Smith of last year when he kind of surprised everybody and was a top 12 quarterback or whatever. Certainly a top 10 real life quarterback for much of the season. We have 2 games where he's kind of eclipsed 20 DraftKings points, and both those were over 25. But if you look at the 2 games, one was week 2 in the Coors Field of the NFL in Detroit, and then one was week 10 against what I can only consider like a minor league NFL defense at this point against Washington, where points. It's just like you see an opposing offense going against the Commanders, and you just start salivating. So that's all to say. We've had a lot of floor games from Geno, and clearly on Thanksgiving he was still playing hurt with this elbow or whatever was going on. And I totally agreed with Silva. The Niners -7, one of the easiest bets of the year. Glad that they were able to hit that on Thanksgiving night. Now, you have only a week of rest because they're playing on Thursday again here. I know you wrote in your article that he was full practice this week. Hopefully that means that any kind of elbow concerns, throwing arm concerns are behind him, but still concerning. Plus the Dallas pass rush, this defense as a whole. If you want to paint the bull case, it's, as I said, 5th most expensive quarterback player on the slate for a quarterback that we know at least still has an upside. That's good. And playing from behind, right? 9.5-point dogs. And they're starting to throw more anyway. You got to figure he's going to be dropping back upwards of 30, 35, 40 times. So what do you do with Geno Smith here? Because I think this is the point of the slate to get right. How much you use Geno Smith.
Yeah, this does feel like the spot, which is crazy that we're leading with the one spot that we wish we knew would be the quarterback position. Of course, that would make things much, much easier. I'm kind of treating Geno the way I have been the rest of the season. He's certainly not the quarterback that he was last season. I don't know what is factoring into that. Maybe he's turning back into Geno Smith that we knew and loved before the breakout from last season. But I still think at 9,200, a 16.5 base projection, quarterbacking an offense that has become one of the more pass-happy offenses in the league and probably needs to be, given the spread in tonight's game, given the way that we expect Dallas's offense to kind of push the pace and push the tempo a little bit as well. I think the way that I'm handling Geno, and you guys that have watched the show know this, I want to try and pound the table for quarterbacks in cash as much as I can. I think they offer the safest floor. I know they offer the safest floor most consistently. However, I think there are two options on the Seattle side that I feel a little bit better about from kind of a safety perspective that are cheaper and make it a little bit easier to get the Cowboys options that I want. So for cash specifically, don't think you need Geno in cash tonight, even though he's generally the quarterback position, generally one of the safer options on the entire slate. The way that I'm planning on attacking Geno is mostly flex only. I still don't think I need him at captain in tournaments, mostly flex only in tournament lineups that already are planning to roster a Seahawks wide receiver, whether that be in flex or in captain. Kind of want that natural correlation there if possible. I think he is a little bit over-owned at captain. Looking at that 4.9% in tournaments, I think he's efficiently or a little bit under-owned at flex there. So trying to kind of attack what I expect to be a very, very good floor for Geno at 9,200. Just don't necessarily think he has that ceiling that is either going to kill me if I don't roster him in cash games or kill me if I don't have him at captain in tournaments.
Yeah, I think that's all very fair. I am in complete agreement with you. I don't even think I put him in my captain pool because I think if the Seahawks pass offense is succeeding, it has to come on the back of one of those skill position guys. I guess there's a possibility that he gets lucky and runs in a touchdown and then spreads out the rest. But that's thin to me, man, really thin. So, but at 44%, I would get over the field with Geno in flex and just play my odds here that even if they're staying within 2 scores, they just have to keep throwing. They have to keep throwing. Maybe this game plays really fast paced. It goes over the 46.5, whatever. 9.5-point dogs. 3 of the last 5 weeks, he's been between 34 and 47 dropbacks. Like I definitely see it getting closer to that mid 40s number tonight. That's all stuff that at only 92 with a supporting cast that I still believe in, I'm pretty comfortable saying like, okay, that's my stand tonight. I want to get 60, 65, maybe even 70% Geno and flex. And just like, even if I'm doing a lot of 4-2 Dallas stuff, let that be a place I get unique where I'm over the field on the quarterback and feel good about that. Maybe I'll come back to regret that later. Jason saying he's going to shit the bed tonight. Certainly possible. He has not been great. And I got to do a little more deep diving. I want to see how that elbow's doing because he did not look like a serviceable NFL quarterback on Thanksgiving night.
One point, just to piggyback off that, because I kind of forgot to mention that there was an article that came out from one of the Seahawks beat reporters, just kind of relaying some quotes from a Pete Carroll press conference. He said that it was a night and day difference between this week and last, and we got to remember that this is not a traditional Thursday night game in the sense that both of these teams played last Thursday on Thanksgiving, so they do have a full week. They did get some practices in. Coaching staffs are rarely going to say negative things about their players, particularly when it comes to health. But I think the fact that he's willing to go out there and say night and day difference, that he's kind of over what hurt him the prior week, seems to be good indications for me. So, like I said, I'm kind of treating Geno like I normally would this season. Not quite the Geno of last year, but still somebody that I think is going to offer a nice floor.
All right, Cody, I have a question for you. Why isn't Dak Prescott being talked about for MVP more? Because if you look at the last 5 games, this is stuff that you don't see very often at all from any quarterback. I obviously, as someone, have done a ton of history for leverage columns and stuff on optimal scoring history, the kind of scores you need to win tournaments at quarterback, especially. I've probably done the most research, and 30 points is kind of that magical number that you hit 30 points as a quarterback. You're feeling decent about, as long as someone doesn't get to 38, 40 on a week, you're feeling good. 4 of the last 5 games, Dak Prescott's between 31 and 41 points. They are running up scores. I knew they would do that against the Giants, but they have a 45-10 win in there, a 49-17, a 33-10, a 43-20, all within 4 of their last 5 games. So as 9.5-point favorites here, I don't ever see them taking their foot off the gas. That's the thing. I just think they keep rolling. I know Edwin was talking about in chat before, they're 12-0 in their last 12 home games with average win margin of 20 plus. Like that is the kind of stuff that you love for a quarterback. So I have 0 holes to poke in Dak tonight. The only question for me is he a lock button candidate for you, A? And then B, how are you handling my captain? Because obviously we still do have the beautiful beast that is CD Lamb sitting there with an even higher ceiling than Dak.
Yeah, I love this discussion, and he should be 100% owned in cash. Let's just get that right out of the way. He's going to end up being 96, 98, something like that percent owned. You take the reduced rate there and just kind of move on. He should be 100% owned. I think we've got what we need in order to fit Dak at captain if we can. It's just a safer option. We'll talk about CD separately in terms of tournaments, but I think for cash, Dak probably profiles best as our cash captain. Everything is pointing in the right direction for Dak Prescott since the week 7 bye, since coming out of the week 7 bye. They've been one of the league's pass happiest offenses. Doesn't really matter what game script they're dealing with. The team ranks 5th on the season in pass rate over expectation, have been plus 8% in pass rate over expectation since coming out of the bye. League's 2nd highest situation neutral pass rate. I mean, what else is there? What else is there to say at this point with Dak from a volume perspective? And then he's adding in. He's been the most efficient he's ever been in his career. Frankly, one of the most efficient, if not the most efficient quarterback in the league this season. And you're absolutely right about the MVP discussion. It's frankly a little concerning, and no disrespect to our friend Jalen Hurts and or any Eagles fans out there, but Jalen Hurts is literally going to get his tush pushed to an MVP award when it probably belongs to Dak Prescott.
Yeah,
at this
it's all
point.
a standings thing, I guess. I mean, they could still come for the division. I think they need to win the division probably for him to get it, as I know Adam and Evan were talking about on the team by team pod. But like, to me, if it's a 2-game or 1-game difference and they're still getting in as a wild card with like the difference in numbers here, if I were a voter, I wouldn't just be saying, oh, okay, this team went 13-4 and they should win, where this team went 12-5. Like, that's where I'm at. But whatever, that's not the point of this conversation. I do think this is the best ball he's played his whole career, at the very least since before that big injury in, 2019, 2020, when he was still 2018 when he was amazing. But I definitely think this is probably the best he's ever played. And I think that they've realized that they have success through the air and they want to just carry that momentum as far as they possibly can. And so I think that's kind of why we're not seeing any kind of neutral game script, even when they're up, right? They're having this success. Let's keep this rolling. This is how we score. This is how we gain momentum. As someone that is a noted Cowboys and Eagles hater, I hate giving either of those guys their dues, but a lot of props here to Dak. So sorry, finish any points you have on Mr. Prescott here.
Yeah, I think the biggest question comes into what do we think, where do we think captain ownership ultimately settles in? And we've seen it this season with quarterbacks, even big home favorites, even with guys that have huge baseline projections, quarterbacks that don't have that kind of Konami code upside, the unicorns, as I like to call them, the Josh Allens, Jalen Hurts of the world, who have that 2 touchdown rushing upside plus 50 plus yards on the ground type upside. We've seen the field just show a little bit more aversion to rostering them at captain because they know they can just get that ceiling from the team's pass catchers. So generally you would see CD Lamb and Brandon Cooks and Jake Ferguson soak up a little bit more captain ownership. In this spot, though, I'm wondering, because of how elevated the Cowboys pass rate has been and because of the pass catching options they have behind CeeDee Lamb, you've got a couple of guys that are fairly cheap. I think the field might show a little bit more willingness to throw out some captain Dak Prescott double stacks. And I was kind of looking at our sim analysis before the show that was just run. I think if I were to make any changes right now, I would come up a little bit on Dak's captain ownership, maybe 12 to 13%, come down a little bit on Tony Pollard, kind of even those guys out. And I think if that still stays in that range, 12 to 13%, he's a phenomenal captain option because it's not quite the Kansas City Chiefs stuff that we discussed where we've got 7, 8, 9 possible pass catchers we can double, Mahomes with. There are some cheaper options. We'll get to them in a second. You've got Jalen Tolbert, Michael Gallup, Brandon Cooks, Jake Ferguson, Luke Schoonmaker. We've got plenty of options we can fill out some doubles with. So I do think that in tournaments, I want a hefty amount of exposure to Dak Prescott at captain.
Yeah, my homie 30 talking about the lack of the schedule stuff going against Dak, and that's fair. And we'll see how they end the season. They probably need to get that Eagles monkey off their back. So they obviously lost in Philly. If they can, I don't know when that game is, the home game against the Eagles, but if they can stomp them down on them there, maybe he gets more respect. Anyway, again, not here to talk about MVP conversation, but I thought it was an interesting way to kind of lead into the discussion because, again, I'm somebody that really looks at these kind of numbers and when guys have the ability to hit 30 DraftKings points at the quarterback position, how often that's optimal. To see someone do it 4 out of 5 weeks, I don't care what the schedule looks like. And, there have been some friendly matchups in there. That is impressive. To me, this is another friendly matchup at home. So I don't see why you can't keep it rolling. I'm very interested in Dak tonight across all different situations. Yep. Triples as well. I know somebody mentioned triples. We'll talk about skill guys. Now, let's get running back out of the way. I'll stay on the Dallas side. Tony Pollard starting to maybe turn a corner post bye week, hit 20 points. I know you mentioned over Thanksgiving. This is still his backfield. I think we still ultimately believe in the talent. We've seen some of that explosive play upside come back to Tony Pollard here. And, this is where we are so prisoner of the moment. With what are we talking about? A 7-game sample to start the season? It's such a small sample. And I get it. Running backs fall off a cliff out of nowhere. So we had reason to be concerned. But I would not at all be surprised to see Tony Pollard handle a big workload, get over 20 points for tonight and perhaps the majority of the rest of his games for this season. And 9-8 seems right. I don't have any issues with the projection, the ownership, the captain ownership. This all seems pretty efficient to me. I know I kind of say that when I just think a guy looks and profiles well, but I just don't have too much to add here on Pollard. How are you feeling about him tonight?
Yeah, I think it's a great macro discussion here on just if you kind of feel that way about a player, then it's probably okay just to come in around where they're being projected to be owned or, where they're projected to be owned at captain. If you don't necessarily need to have these overwhelming leveraged positions on every single player on the slate. So if I came in with 55% total Tony Pollard and 12 to 13% at captain, I'd feel pretty good about that. I kind of feel the same way about you. Everything from pricing to projection to ownership feels right to me, feels relatively efficient. I think he's going to be owned about as much as he should be owned relative to how frequently I think he wins, is in optimal lineups at both flex and captain. So if I'm building a portfolio of lineups, whether that be 10 lineups, 20 lineups, or 150, my exposure is probably going to be reflected in how I feel about him as a whole. If you're someone that does want to take a stance on TP, there's some positive signals here. And as you kind of alluded to, the first 7 weeks before the bye, it's still a small sample after the bye. I don't know if the week off, the rest was good for his legs. I don't know if the team has started using him differently. I don't know if it's just all kind of small sample bias stuff. But since the week 7 bye, he's increased his explosive run rate, ranks third in explosive run rate at 7.8%. He's 12th in missed tackles forced per attempt and 8th in yards after contact per attempt. Those all courtesy of Fantasy Points data. I mean, things seem to be pointing in the right direction, as you alluded to as well. It's his backfield. There's no other true contender to the backfield here. Rico Dowdle will obviously mix in some, but as a 9-point home favorite, this isn't an overly imposing matchup against the Seattle run defense. I think all signs are kind of pointing in a positive direction for Tony Pollard.
Yeah, I agree. Let's have the Dowdle conversation quickly. He's 4,200. He's definitely the clear number 2. And I think Jack Miller put him in his article of players to stash for the fantasy playoff season long. I totally think that's all smart. So you can kind of bring that same conversation into a 1-game sample. If Tony Pollard, unfortunately, tweaks his ankle in the first quarter or something like that, you definitely want Rico Dowdle. And that's why we consider these RB2s on 1-game slates. However, 4-2 to me, just expensive enough. We're seeing Pollard start to turn it on a little bit. This is just I'm a max 1 here because of how much the Cowboys are passing the ball. I'm not that interested in going to both these guys. I want Dowdle in situations where he either vultures a touchdown or Pollard gets hurt. And I know that's not usually what we're talking about on 1-game slates. We're usually open to letting running backs go together, but that's my thought. Any thoughts on Dowdle or potential rules here?
Yeah, I'm kind of with you. And I think these guys are negatively correlated specifically at their ceilings in kind of a big way. In week 1, when Pollard did have 22 DraftKings points against the Giants, Dowdle only had 2. In week what was it, week 11, where Tony Pollard had 18, his next biggest game of the season. Dowdle only had 4. Last week, even when Tony Pollard had 22 and Dowdle kind of went off and had 10, like 10 at 4,200, you're probably okay with. If I asked you if you locked in 10 points at 4,200, you're probably like, I think I can maybe beat that production elsewhere. The point stands, like he's just a little bit too expensive in order to feel fairly good. I think if you're really being cognizant of duplicates and you're really trying to limit that stuff, you can allow it a little bit more. 10% feels a little bit just a smidge high for me in terms of his total ownership. Somebody that should mix into, an MME portfolio, somebody that maybe even get in like 1 or 2 lineups in a 20 max set. But I just think they priced him a smidge too high for me to get overly excited at 10%.
Yeah, I agree with your 20 max set. Like I wouldn't mind getting him in there as a way to gain some immediate leverage. Plus, like if things roll right, he's a player with some upside. But I think all that also kind of looks efficient. If you ended up a little bit over the field in MME at 10 total percent, I would be okay with it. But I wouldn't go crazy here on Rico Dowdle. All right, let's talk the Seattle side. Still no Kenneth Walker here. So it is going to be the Zach Charbonnet show once again. Really great role, but he keeps running into these really tough matchups. All that's to say, I think this is kind of a nice tag for Charbonnet, even in a tough spot. He can get involved through the air. How do you feel about the rookie here?
Yeah, it's kind of like how concerned are you about being a 9-point road underdog against a pretty dang good Cowboys run defense? I know the Cowboys pass rush and the Cowboys secondary kind of gets all the flowers, but there's been a pretty good Cowboys run defense. So how concerned are you with a rookie running back on the road, huge underdog? Is that enough for you to not want to roster him at 6,800, which is a phenomenal price tag? I mean, if we had this role for Zach Charbonnet all season, he'd probably come into this game at like 9,600. He's really underpriced here. He's going to be the bell cow RB1 in this offense. It's just one of those things where the matchup is concerning enough that you can't just windmill slam it in. He is going to be a bell cow, though, however, and I think he is one of those guys that makes me feel comfortable about not having Geno in cash. He handled 75% of the team's rushing attempts since Kenneth Walker went down, ran around on 71% of dropbacks. He's added a 16% target share. So we know if they get down, he can play in the passing game. He's playing on basically all short down and distance, long down and distance, 2-minute snaps. He's really not coming off the field. And they might mix in Kenny McIntosh a little bit more, who played last week, but only played on special teams. They might mix in DJ Dallas a little bit more, but they haven't done that in the 2 weeks since Kenneth Walker went down. I really feel like this is the rookie running back show here with Zach Charbonnet at 6,800. And I think the role here and the price is cheap enough. The role is good enough. The price is cheap enough that he's going to overcome the matchup and probably give you a pretty good fantasy score, one that you're safe with in cash and one that you might even want in tournaments. I think the 47.9% total ownership is a little light. I also think the 9.3% captain ownership is a little light. This is a guy that's probably going to touch the ball if he stays healthy 18 to 20 times, if not more. That's a pretty dang good role for somebody that's priced at 6,800.
Yeah, and to me, the upside is completely in the pass game. And I know chat's talking about potentially over 3.5 receptions. I'm not going to get into the props talk here. That is not what we are here for. But I will say this: 4 catches, 6 catches, 4 catches in his last 3 games with expanded workloads. 4 catches, 4 targets, 6 targets, 5 targets, according to DraftKings metrics. I don't have PFF in front of me, according to in the last game. So he's caught every single one but 1 target. You would like to think with playing from behind, with the prolific Cowboys pass rush, with a great role, like 3.5 catches, and I think it's plus money someplace. Again, not talking too much about props, but that's the way he hits his ceiling, right?
Yeah.
To me in this game, because I don't know how efficient he'll be on the ground, but he'll get carries. Maybe he falls in the end zone. Maybe he goes 5 for 40 through the air, and then boom, at 6'8", like I think that feels pretty good. So I don't mind taking shots here. I wish it was a little bit more expensive because I think it's going to keep his ownership somewhat up there at 6'8", and you're seeing around 50% total ownership, 9% captain. I know you were saying maybe you'd even take that up higher, a little bit higher. So that's a little bit scary for me. I think if I'm attacking a Seahawks skill position captain, I still want it to be a receiver here. But in the flex, I could certainly see it happening in many different simulations, if you will.
For what it's worth, the Sims do love Charbonnet at captain. They think the total ownership looks pretty efficient. He's roughly owned as much as we think he's going to be optimal after running our 20,000 Sims. But at captain, I think part of it just because he has some of those 25 point games within his range of outcomes, he looks like he's a little bit under-owned at captain. I do think once we hop off the show, I'll probably tick that up for established run subscribers. Maybe it settles in around 10, 11, 12%. I still think in that range, that's pretty good. People like to you look at the 9-point spread, you think about the Dallas defense, you think about how bad Seattle was last week, and that's really fresh in your mind. And it's like, how does he really have a ceiling? Can he really get there? It's a lot of recency bias playing into that type of stuff. And I think, yeah, he absolutely does if he's going to touch the ball as many times as we think he does.
Nice. DJ Dallas, really cheap, and I do think this is kind of a two-man backfield right now without Kenneth Walker. 1,200. We're talking about the ways to squeeze in as many studs as possible. He, to me, seems like one of the upside plays, as much as I believe in kind of the Charbonnet bell cow role here.
Yeah, I think he is okay. There was a little bit of positive sentiment about Kenny McIntosh potentially mixing in. It's not guaranteed. He played last week for the first time all season, I believe. Only played on special teams, but he got a full week of practice in this week. Pete Carroll in his press conference kind of talked about maybe mixing him in a little bit. I still think we're probably looking at like 1 to 2 touches, if anything. But it's really been the Charbonnet show even since kind of the last game and a half or game and 3/4 since Kenneth Walker went out. I actually think he got injured on the first drive of that Week 11 game. It's been a 5% rush share for DJ Dallas in Week 11, 11% rush share in Week 12. Like if he gets there, hopefully you're kind of just banking on some touchdown luck there. But I think the $1,200 price tag should keep him in your MME player pool. 7.6% ownership. Certainly nice. So definitely don't have any issues if you want to throw DJ Dallas in a tournament player pool.
All right, let's get to the fun stuff, and that is all the pass catchers in this 47-point total. Let's start on the Seattle side. Tyler Lockett, I think, is going to be quite chalky tonight. I know we're only seeing 7 percentage point difference in their total ownership between him and DK Metcalf, but man, that price difference between Lockett and Metcalf, plus kind of the just negligible differences in role. I mean, you lay it all out there in your article, but to me, this is a pay up to get P contrarian spot. I know you said the exact same thing for Metcalf tonight, and wouldn't be surprised to see that difference in ownership get even wider.
Oh baby, we're in lockstep on this one because I totally agree with you. Yeah. I think what will ultimately happen here is a little bit of that 32.4. I think Lockett maybe comes in like low 40s, maybe mid 40s, especially in some of the sharper field stuff where that $7,200 price tag is really nice to fit in there. Maybe he comes up, but I think the biggest thing here is DK is going to come down. Like some of that ownership is going to pull from DK. It's going to go up to guys like CeeDee Lamb, going to go up to guys like Tony Pollard, going to go up to guys like Dak, and going to end up being a little bit more stars and scrubs heavy than we're projecting here. That $9,600 tag is tough to fit in for DK Metcalf. And especially after you look at the roles. If you just look at the roles on paper, yes, you are absolutely right. Tyler Lockett, DK Metcalf, very similar in terms of like where their projections should shake out. But I do think there's obviously that upside. And if I'm going to get paid off with a kind of that pay up to be contrarian ownership discount with DK, that's where I want to be. Still think there are some massive, massive games within his box score outlook, and 24.9% target share, 43.5% air yard share, still leads the team in red zone target share. It's going to come with some volatility because he's getting targeted further downfield. His targets are less likely to be converted, but when it hits, I think it hits in a pretty big way, and I want to have more exposure than the field does on Mr. DK Metcalf, king of the PSM.
Yeah, definitely been a little bit of a disappointing situation for DK Metcalf so far this year as far as upside, but we know those ceiling games are still in there. I particularly like him at captain. I think we're aligned there, and I don't think Tyler Lockett is a bad play. I think he profiles better for cash at that price, but this is certainly a guy with high touchdown upside. We know he's got a ceiling. He had a connection, really strong connection downfield with Geno Smith last year. If that elbow's back and they need to be taking shots downfield, he's still the guy I want. So I do like Tyler Lockett. I just think that when you look at this kind of Metcalf situation where there's a chance he gets squeezed even more, I think that's intriguing. All right, Cody, it's time. Jackson Smith and Jig Book talk, because I feel like he's been kind of like one of the most hot button topics in all of fantasy from the summer onwards, right? From best ball season all the way to today, where he's in that, first of all, price wise on the Showdown slate, he's kind of in no man's land here at 5.2. It's like cheap enough to consider, but also a little bit too expensive for what the role's been. And then we have this kind of conflicting narrative all around with, are the Cowboys good against the slot or not? Edwin's talking in chat right now that they are not. Play the slot guy. It's where they're most vulnerable. But then if you look at some of the research you did and just kind of what some of the numbers tell you, right? I'll just read directly from your article. First of all, JSN been held to single-digit DraftKings points in 8 of 11 games. That's notable, right? Gets a Cowboys secondary that is allowing the league's lowest target share to opposing slot receivers, only 27% through week 12. And you had mentioned the third fewest points. Now, I think you had Silva had wrote the fourth fewest points total to receivers. So that's something to consider. But that is telling you they're not good. Now, if you look at last week, Curtis Samuel had 11 targets in the slot against the Dallas team. I think that there could be volume heading that way, and potentially maybe it's heading in the right direction for slot receivers against Dallas. But I don't think the numbers are telling you this is just a smash spot. I would trust someone like Edwin, who seems to be a diehard Dallas fan and watches his team a lot more. I think there's value in that. All this to ramble is to say, what side do you fall on here? And is JSN a good tournament play tonight?
Yeah, look, I'm kind of somewhere in the middle, which shocker, I don't have a super strong stance here. I don't necessarily see the matchup related stuff. So now maybe it's a schematic type of thing. Maybe it's because Jordan Lewis is the Cowboys' worst secondary player, and the metrics kind of bear that out too. Fantasy points per route run, he is the worst among the three main guys between him, Stephon Gilmore, and Deron Bland. Yards per route covered, fantasy points, all of these metrics kind of lead you in that direction. But if you just look more macro level on where the Cowboys are allowing targets to, not really allowing targets to the slot position. Now that could be because of who they've played. It could be because teams that played them are just targeting their perimeter receivers more often, or inline players or running backs, whatever the case may be. So if you're telling me there's a schematic thing that me, just as a non-ball knower, is not aware of, totally understand that. I just think from kind of a matchup, from a volume perspective, look, JSN's 5,200. It is truly in no man's land. The base projection is not great. I know Mark, Dank on the projection side kind of felt like, if anything, we were being a little bit optimistic on the JSN target share that we're giving him for this game. And the metrics haven't been good. It's a guy that's got a pretty low volume role with a low ADOT, and he probably needs to find pay dirt in order to pay off that price tag. Not something that I'm feeling overly confident in. And he's kind of coming through with a little bit of ownership, 28.8% total, 4.8% captain. If you want to paint me the narrative that this is a schematic thing, the Cowboys are just going to give up a few more receptions to slot receivers, I can get a little bit more behind it. I just think JSN's a little bit too owned for the price tag and for the role that he's shown us to this point. A guy that I think is pretty likely to score single-digit DraftKings points, as he's done in 8 of 11 games. Not really someone that I'm kind of falling all over myself to get excited about.
Fair enough. I would take shots. I take shots as like a way to save a little bit of money here, bring back stuff, whether it's 3-3s or even if you 4-2 Dallas. And I mentioned like Gino, maybe they successfully take out both of those guys. So I don't know. I just think I could see it going either way. I definitely could see it going either way. And it's, I think, one of the other few decision points on this slate. Let's talk the tight end situation here for a second. You mentioned Noah Fant starting to separate possibly a little bit in what has really been a three-headed, I don't even want to call it a monster, a three-headed puppy throughout most of this season with Noah Fant, Will Dissly, and Colby Parkinson. Fant is the most expensive of this three. And it's weird because we kind of saw that last year as well, that like, if I recall correctly, like post week 12, week 13, Noah Fant had a couple games where he was usable in DFS. So maybe it's something about the end of the season. Maybe it's something about they just need playmakers out on the field in these situations. And he is still the most talented of these from a pass catching perspective. But I think he's intriguing here at 3-2. Dallas a little bit vulnerable to inline tight ends. How are you feeling about Fant or Dissly or Parkinson as punts here?
Yeah, this is like that three-headed dragon gif or meme where it's like the two scary dragons and then the one goofy-looking dragon, except all three of these guys, Noah Fant, Will Dissly, and Colby Parkinson, are the goofy-looking dragons. It's nothing to get excited about, but I think that where you're looking at 10.2% ownership for Fant, 4.4% ownership for Dissly, 5.3% ownership for Colby Parkinson, and you're looking at the respective price tags, I think this is one of those spots where you can take a little bit of a leverage stance on the position as a whole in tournaments, and you don't even have to have a huge stance. You could end up with like 8 to 10% Dissly. You could end up with 10 to 12% Colby Parkinson. You could end up with 15 to 20% Noah Fant and kind of cover a few bases there with those guys. I think it's possible, given the expected pass volume that we're expected to see from Seattle tonight. Either one of these guys could luck box their way into a touchdown, or one of these guys could walk away with a couple of receptions. And if that's the case, that could be enough. Of course, because of the way the role has started to separate for Fant, he's the guy that I'm most excited about. He's the guy I also expect the field to be the most excited about we're starting to see like a legitimate route participation from Fant that we would kind of expect to see from a tight end one. It's gone from 41% to 55% to 57%, all the way up to 61% last week. I think with kind of the chips in the middle of the table, with them needing to win one of these next 3 games against these tough NFC opponents, I think you're probably going to see a little bit more Noah Fant than you will Will Dissly and Colby Parkinson. And, as a result, at 3,200, I'm pretty interested here.
Yeah. In my head, I feel like I've seen Will Dissly be optimal on however many single game slates over the last
Way
5 years. But I agree. It's Fant's show right now that I'm most interested in. And then Jake Bobo, I think we all believe is actually a pretty good real life NFL receiver. With the other 3 guys there, he's probably mostly only getting on the field in 4 receiver sets, but mentioned 9.5 point dogs here, 1,600. I think that's a totally viable MME punt, 5% total ownership. That seems about right. But if you wanted to say like, hey, I like this guy, there's some touchdown equity there, and you want to get involved with Bobo, I wouldn't actually blame you. I know that's probably way too much talking on a 4th receiver that's 1,600, but do you have any Bobo thoughts?
Yeah, I think large field dart throw, he's totally fine. It's actually impressive how good his targets per route run has been, even with these guys all healthy. 15% on the season. It's been a 17% targets per route run rate last in week 10, 20% in week 11, 20% in week 12. He's going to, if he's on the field for 25% of Geno Smith dropbacks, he's probably going to earn 1, 2, maybe 3 targets as kind of a ceiling. A small bit of touchdown equity there. Again, this is where we talk about like large field stuff where getting unduplicated lineups is very important. Getting unique lineups is very important at 5%. I think a guy that you can take a little bit of a sprinkle on here.
Absolutely. All right, let's go over to the Dallas side. A couple of very interesting names to talk about here, of course, starting with CD Lamb. And we do have a massive 20% captain ownership projection here. To me, that seems right. This is an elite player right now, leading the league in all different types of real metrics, fake air. I think air yards is a fake stat. So fake air yard metrics, all this kind of stuff that the guy has been a killer. While we've seen Dak Prescott rake up these 30+ point games, we've seen the same into the 30s and 40s for CD Lamb. I don't think a matchup that particularly scares you at this point either. 11-4, that's fair. 68% total ownership, that's fair. 40-point ceiling makes sense to me. You just matching the field here, or you have any thoughts on CD? Because I think it's impossible to fade him personally.
Yeah, I do think it's impossible to fade him. If you're building one lineup, you're going to have to make that decision. Do I want to, in single entry, small field stuff, story, especially like you're going to end up walking into, maybe 25% ownership. I think there's enough good options on this slate that it prevents it from getting upwards of like 30. But I think even in sharper fields where his ownership is definitely going to be higher than we have projected right now, I think even at like 25%, it's probably pretty good. 27% is probably pretty good. You started getting into like the 30% range. If you think it gets that high in the contest that you're specifically playing, then you've got to start thinking about where does that ownership come from? Does it make some of these other players better captain options? But for me, in a 150 set or a 20 max set, I'm trying to get overweight here. And I want to try and dial in these ownership projections as much as possible. But I think there's a little bit of a cat and mouse game here where if like we make him, 22.5% or something, then the field will come in a little bit under. If I leave him at 19.8%, then the field's going to come in a little bit over. So it's like trying to match the leveling here. I think there's a pretty tight range in large field where it's like between 18 and 22 or something like that. So for me, probably someone in my MME set, I want to get around 25 to 30% personal exposure to. I think he's easily the best overall captain, just ignoring ownership, easily the best overall captain option on the entire slate. The 11-4 price tag isn't so prohibitive that I don't think you can get to him. Of course, all of the air yards metrics, target share, end zone target share, all of those things are fantastic for CD. So not too many negative things to say about him. The only thing I would caution here is just consider his projected ownership, specifically in the tournaments that you're playing. If it's higher dollar, smaller field, consider does this actually get up to like 30%? And if you think it does, then maybe start to look elsewhere. But up to that point, I think it's a pretty darn good play.
All right. If the way you handled Geno Smith, in my opinion, was maybe the 1A or most important thing to get right on this slate, I do think this secondary Dallas pass catcher spot is the next most, because again, we're projecting them to score a lot of points. Usually even when CD has big games, there are usable other receivers, especially when they're getting to these 40+ point home performances, has Dallas. And to me, I know the chat was kind of calling it out before as a potential flag plan option, but man, Brandon Cooks, I know 8K is getting up there in price, but he profiles excellent. First of all, I know Silva's really into the way they finally figured it out on him. 80% of snaps last week. I think he's gone over his receiving yards prop in like 3 of the last 4 games. only 22% total ownership. Like he's very much kind of where earlier in the season it was like, all right, he can barely separate from Michael Gallup. Now it's like, well, how close can he get to CD? He's not close to CD, but he's definitely in a tier of his own as a secondary Dallas pass catching option. Just our typical like good tournament option here at 8K for Brandon Cooks.
Yeah, doesn't this feel like kind of now, especially as the way the Dallas offense has progressed throughout the season, doesn't this almost just feel like Gabe Davis and Stephon Diggs?
Yeah, totally. Totally.
Right?
It really does. Chase said the same thing just now in chat. Yeah.
Did he? Okay. Yeah, exactly. Oh my gosh,
that.
exactly. Yeah, this is perfect. It really does feel like the Gabe Davis spot for me. And I kind of wrote as much in the article, like this is an extremely volatile wide receiver too. 8K is way too expensive for Brandon Cooks in this spot. He should probably be like 6,600, 6,400. You're looking at like him compared to Zach Charbonnet and Tyler Lockett. And you're even kind of comparing him to guys like DK Metcalf, who's $1,600 more expensive. Kind of comparing him to guys like Tony Pollard. I think all of that to say he's going to be pretty damn low owned at both flex and at captain, because when you look at the box scores, especially, this is extremely volatile. People don't want to play for that volatility at an 8K price tag. It really does feel like the Gabe Davis spot. You have an electric, high-powered, pass-first offense with really, really good quarterback play. Sometimes Brandon Cooks is going to give you 30, like he did a couple of weeks ago. Sometimes he's going to give you 17, which is probably good enough in this spot. Like he did a couple weeks ago. But other times he's going to give you like 1.7, like he's done in the last couple of games. He's going to give you 7.2, like he's done in the last couple of games. Yep. So when I see these spots with these guys that have very, 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 very wide ranges of outcomes, I probably just want to take my shots there a little bit more at captain, try and get a little bit over that 4.2% that I think is very likely to hold at that range or come in even lower, and just kind of take my shots there. If I think Brandon Cooks has a great game, or kind of accesses close to that ceiling, I probably want him at captain. I do feel very confident in him coming in pretty low at both flex and captain, though.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I do think that he probably is warranted of like a 7K tag if you look at the, obviously the floor is still there with, as you mentioned, the 1.7 and the 7.2s, but what is that? 4 of his last 6 games over 14 points. And then also in 4 of those last 6 games, he scored a touchdown. You like to see that. He had the one huge explosion against the Giants. His average reception is downfield as well. I mean, he's been like 18 yards a catch last week, 19 in that Giants game. And that was with a huge game. You got to like that. There's a lot to like here. So yes, the floor could be low, but I think his floor is closer to like the 8 points that we saw in Carolina than it is against the 1 point in Philly at this point. So obviously you don't want 8 points, but if this game goes under, at least I think there is a little bit of a floor there for your smaller field single entry stuff. I wouldn't completely rule it out there either. All right, let's talk Ferguson before we get into those next receivers here, because Ferguson definitely a guy who's kind of stepped right into that Dalton Schultz-esque role where he's a little bit touchdown dependent, but he's got a legit role here on this team. 2 straight weeks, a little disappointing, only 1 for 35 on Thanksgiving, 3 for 32 in the week prior. But then before that, he had rattled off 3 straight games of scoring touchdowns, 3 straight games of double-digit points. This is definitely I think a price that is fair at 6.2, not much ownership. I think should be in your captain pool. I don't have anything to add there. I just think he's solid. When you're getting into the heavy Dallas stuff, Dallas triples, Dallas doubles, I think he should be well included in those combinations.
Yeah, it feels like another spot that's just pretty efficient to me in terms of where his price tag is, where his projected captain ownership is, where his total ownership is. Projection feels right to me. He's one of those guys that if you play him and he scores a touchdown, you're going to feel like a genius. If you play him and he does not score a touchdown, you're probably going to be pretty disappointed, because a lot of his ceiling performances, not even really ceiling, just him paying off a $6,200 showdown price tag, are going to come from him falling into the end zone, not because he's getting massive volume, or not because he's getting targeted deep downfield or anything along those lines. A lot of it's just tied to how many touchdown passes do you think Dak throws, and how many of those do you think go to Jake Ferguson. So that's kind of where it comes in. It's like his red zone target share is really what's boosting his fantasy viability. It's a 15.1% target share, 10.5% air yard share. It's not really this massive role for him, but good enough for him that if he's going to be on the field in the red zone and could fall into the end zone, that's somebody that you want some exposure to. I do agree that he makes our captain player pool. Personally, think I'm probably like right at or coming in a little bit under that 5.3% captain ownership right now. Just have a little bit more love for some other guys, but not a ton of holes to poke in Jake Ferguson's outlook.
Yeah, I'd be under the captain too, just because when we were just talking that through, and I think this makes the most sense. I think I like Ferguson most tonight in Dak captain lineups, right? I think there's a when he scores, if it's 5 for 80 and a touchdown, or even 5 for 80 and 2, maybe a 5 for 80 and 2, like a Mark Andrews. I call that the Mark Andrews. Maybe if he does the Mark Andrews, he'd be the optimal captain. But certainly if it was like a 5 for 80 and 1, you could see it in a spot where Dak is captain and you're doing Dak doubles or triples. All right. Secondary guys here. It looks like Jalen Tolbert has kind of closed the gap as a wide receiver 3 option on Michael Gallup. In fact, he is projecting better than Michael Gallup tonight at $800 cheaper. So sounds like you probably have more interest in Tolbert there than Gallup. I think this is kind of a just throw your hands up spot. Not too much ownership on both of these guys, but I could see it. Tolbert's eating in more. A little bit of pop there. Still only a second-year receiver where Gallup's had all that injury history. So I could see why you'd be more interested in Tolbert tonight.
Yeah, definitely. I think $800 cheaper. The ownership hasn't gotten too out of hand, although I do think in some sharper field contests, you could see Tolbert maybe spike to like 20 and Gallup kind of stay in that 10% range. If you're getting an $800 discount, since the week 7 bye, the team has clearly shown an interest in getting Jalen Tolbert a little bit more involved. And like you said, I think he's got a little bit of pop to him. He played well in the preseason as well. So over the last 5 weeks, Gallup still leads ever so slightly in route participation, but you're starting to see Tolbert separate in terms of targets per route run, total target share, end zone targets, kind of all the metrics we're looking at for a receiver when he's on the field. So for me, I think Jalen Tolbert is kind of one of the premier spend down options on the entire slate. Along those same lines, though, I think that you could see ownership get low enough on Michael Gallup that he kind of becomes an interesting tournament option, contrarian tournament option. Yeah. As well at 3,800. So I have quite a bit of interest in the secondary, now tertiary, I guess, column Cowboys pass catchers with Michael Gallup and Jalen Tolbert.
Yeah, I agree with that. Last week Gallup played 18 snaps, Tolbert played 20 of 54. So yeah, maybe he's passed them slightly. Maybe a little bit more juice there, but I agree that Gallup can be that large field dart throw. For sure. All right. Anyone else here? Schoonmaker, I guess, kind of has settled in as the true tight end too. Now that he's back and healthy, iced out. Hender's shot as a Princeton Fant got elevated or something today as a name I've never heard of. Kevontae Turpin, somebody that scored a touchdown 2 of his last 4 or 5 games, I believe. Is out there kind of every now and then for gadget plays. Obviously, he's out there for return and kicks. Any interest in any of these guys?
Yeah, Schoonmaker is kind of your prototypical, like, does he get 1 reception for 8 yards and a touchdown, or does he just get 1 reception for 8 yards and not find the end zone? Because he's not out there a ton. Right. But I think you can make paint that bull case that, like, hey, if he gets an end zone target, that might be enough to pay off. You're seeing his route participation kind of settle in that like 18 to 25% range. He has been pretty good at earning targets when he's been out there, or the team is just scheming things up for him when he's out there. But yeah, it's one of those guys that if he gets an end zone target, you're probably feeling pretty good about it. If he does not, then it's not something you want. I think he should make your MME player pool. Man, I wish they made Kevontae Turpin like 1,600 because I think even if he got an end around and found the end zone, it still might not be enough to pay off a $2,600 price tag in a game where we expect to be, there to be a lot of scoring. I do still think he profiles pretty well as a large field tournament dart throw. Of course, you've got the punt return outs, which I would not lean on. But he is explosive. We've seen it all the way back to his USFL days. Gary, you and I specifically have seen it. Very explosive with the ball in his hands, of course. But it is a gadget player who's probably going to be capped around kind of like 2 to 4 touches per game. And again, 2,600 is a price tag where he's actually got to do something to pay that off.
Yeah, 5 routes on 5 snaps last week for Turpin. Like they're it's very minimal. Now, weird things happen on 1 game slates. Plus, you have the slight upside if he returns a kick. So it's more interest in Turpin as a wide receiver 5 than I am most other wide receiver 5s. But it's still a sprinkle only to me. All right, let's talk DSTs and kickers and get out of here. I think the field will flock to Cowboys defense most here of the 2 defenses. Now, it is an expensive tag at 56, but they're home. They're getting a Geno Smith that say, hey, even if he's less than 100%, probably still prone to some mistakes. And this is a team that certainly gets a lot of interceptions, gets a lot of pick sixes, gets a lot of sacks. Like they're able to score as a defense here. How are you feeling about anything on the Cowboys defense or anything else you see on your screen there?
Yeah, don't get lulled into a safe sense of security here with the Cowboys DST, especially if you load up our projections into the solver, throw on some variants, and then click 150 or 300 optimize, you're not going to get much Cowboys DST. And so you're probably thinking, wow, they're probably not going to be very owned, are they? They're going to be owned. People are going to flock to the Cowboys DST. It seems like they score a defensive touchdown every week. Deron Bland himself scores a defensive touchdown every week. You've got Geno Smith coming off, his worst game of the last 2 years. People remember seeing that. That was in prime time. People will be very aware of that. And on top of that, you have a Cowboys defense that ranks first in ESPN's pass rush win rate against the Seahawks offensive line that ranks 20th in pass block win rate. People are going to be aware of this. You're not going to sneak anything by anyone, especially in the large field stuff. They'll probably push 25% or more total ownership. You know how I feel about defenses when they're going to be extremely expensive and they're going to be extremely owned. It's generally a spot that I like to steer clear of because it's such a volatile position. It's such a tough to predict position that I generally want to attack them when they're going to be lower owned. So I'm probably going to steer clear of Cowboys DST and anything that isn't at least a 4-2, but more importantly, like 5-1 stuff. I think they look really good in 5-1 stuff if you can find a way to get it unique. And I just don't have a ton of faith in them coming in low owned, and it's a volatile position. Don't want to try and get too out over my skis there. Seahawks D, on the other hand, 3,400, really cheap price tag, 9.1% total ownership. This team is going to drop back a ton, which is great for your opposing defense's fantasy production or possible fantasy production. Could Dak throw a pick? Could Dak throw a pick that is returned for 6? Of course he could. Could he get sacked a couple of times, even behind a good offensive line? Of course he could. So I like the Seahawks defense a little bit at 9.1% ownership. And then as far as the kickers go, I think Brandon Aubrey is at least cheap enough here. Generally, I think we've seen kickers start to get priced up to like 5,200, 5,400 here. He's at home in the Dome. Awesome team total, 4,800. I think he is we're kind of back to like kickers in cash consideration here. I think Brandon Aubrey can certainly be played in cash. He looks like a pretty good option.
Yeah, I agree. And I think you can make a case for both kickers here, kind of getting where you fit in that mid tier. I think they both make sense. Yeah, the defense thing's tough. Like Dak is, because I agree, a 3,400 defense on a showdown slate always seems solid to me, but Dak is really taking care of the ball this year, right? Only 6 interceptions compared to last year when he was throwing them consistently, and half of those came in one game against San Francisco. So really, if you look at it, in 11 games or so this year, he's really only had interception in 3 of them. And that's with dropping back a lot. Now that's, obviously you can have a sack, strip, fumble. It's one game, anything can happen. But the way they're pouring it on defenses, I don't think you're getting any kind of points from lack of or keeping the other team out of the end zone. So you need to pile up the picks and the sacks and stuff if you're Seattle. Dallas, I don't have much to add. I think I would be terrified of fully fading them, but I want them in onslaught stuff probably most. All right, I think that does it. Cody, go ahead and flag plant Brandon Cooks.
I'm going to leave you, Brandon Cooks, because I think there's more. That's so nice of you. There's more volatile outcomes here, and I've dealt with enough volatile outcomes. Plus, you're coming off DJ Moore, so you're kind of feeling yourself a little bit. You're going to say this one with your chest. I'm going to let you go on the Brandon Cooks spiel. Okay. I'm going to the other side of the ball, and since you took one of the most expensive players on the slate with DJ Moore last Showdown show, I'm going to take one of the most expensive players on the slate, not from the Cowboys though, from the Seahawks. I think we are going to get paid off with a pretty significant pay up to be contrarian ownership discount on king of the PSM, DK Metcalf. Move aside Donald Parham. Tonight is the night for Mr. Metcalf. Still leads the team in target share, still leads the team in air yard share, still leads the team in end zone targets. I think he's going to remind people that he is a problem, even against a really good Cowboys secondary. DK Metcalf, optimal captain tonight at 9,600.
Yeah, I love the direct leverage you get there from Lockett, especially I think in the captain spot. I think he can really get squeezed out. So yeah, I kind of thought we were going on these two players. We already did the Brandon Cook spiel, so go ahead and go back to 15 minutes ago or whatever it was. But AK, a little bit too pricey for Brandon Cooks, but I do think there's a massive ceiling upside there. Hey, maybe Seattle does everything they can to sell out to stop CeeDee Lamb. I don't think it'll be successful, but if they do, I think that'll funnel even more to Cooks. However, even if you just think that there's a chance that Dallas just lays it on again, puts up 40 points. I think there's room for many mouths to be fed. That includes Brandon Cooks in our typical Gabe Davis showdown flag plan. All right, that'll do it. People saying we're doing a terrible job, so that's great. And I'm just kidding. We appreciate all of you guys. Thank you guys for tuning in. We'll be back on Monday night. Monday night is Bengals, Jags. Definitely a game that if you asked us 3 weeks ago, we would have been really excited for. Now, the Jake Browning-led Bengals, not as much, but should still be a fun one in Jacksonville. The Jags offense is getting it going. Yeah, that's the one after. I think that's the week, the next week.
Is it the week
that,
after?
Yeah, they
Okay.
took out Chiefs Patriots in week, or maybe even week. That might even be week 15 because week 14 was. Yeah, that's week 15. That's 2 weeks because week 14 is Giants Packers, which for some reason they have not flexed out. You have the ability to flex out a Monday night game, and you have a freaking Giants Packers next week, and you did not flex it out because they want to torture new football fans once again. Anyway, we'll be back for the Seahawks Bengals on Monday night. Thank you guys all so much for tuning in. I thought this was a fun one. Exciting game here tonight. Wish you all the best of luck. We'll catch you on Monday. Take care, everybody.